Hi everyone, welcome to TAM Lab number 107. My name is Guy Bowdler from the UK and Ireland TAM team, and today we have a cracking session for you with configuring webhooks with vRealize operations and log insight by one of our most prolific alumnists, Brian Wuckner. So Brian, welcome, thanks very much for doing the session, and over to you.
Great, thanks Guy, appreciate it. I'm going to start out with just a couple slides here, so let me share this out. Can you confirm you can see my screen? Do I have the wrong screen shared here?
Yeah.
Let me try that one more time. Does that look better?
Yeah.
All right, cool, thanks. All right, so as Guy mentioned, we're going to talk about configuring webhooks with VROPS and Log Insight. And so, this functionality has been around for a little bit. So if you start Googling or looking for information on webhooks, you may actually come across some articles that are a few years old. I've got a couple links in here. In previous versions of like VROPS, there was a REST notification plugin. And with that, a certain kind of message was generated by VROPS, and that same message was sent to any system. Unfortunately, a lot of like systems that you might try and send a webhook to require a specific format. So you needed this kind of shim to sit in between VROPS and the system that you were trying to send the notification to. As of VROPS 8.4 and Log Insight 8.4, that's no longer required. So the process is much easier than it used to be. So just wanted to kind of level set, like this isn't necessarily new functionality, it's just much improved. But I think it begs the question, what is a webhook? So here on the next slide, we'll look at the Wikipedia definition of what a webhook is. Quite a bit of text, but the few pieces that I really want to kind of dial in on are it's an HTTP post typically with a format of JSON, and it allows users to configure when an event happens in one system to invoke some sort of behavior on another system. So this is the wordy version of what a webhook is. I always like pictures when we can make pictures work, and so I found this one online. There's a link there at the bottom of the page, shows where this this diagram came from. That site actually has a whole bunch of examples and explanations of webhooks, but this one picture kind of summarized it, right? We've got one system that is doing an HTTP post request to another system. If we build out this slide one little bit here, we can see a couple examples of systems, right? On the left, we have PowerShell, VROPS, and Log Insight. And then, system B could be Microsoft Teams or Slack, maybe a help desk ticketing system, things like PagerDuty, Bugzilla, all sorts of systems, support this inbound webhook notification method. And all sorts of systems like PowerShell, VROPS, and Log Insight can actually call those webhooks. So if you're looking for examples of different kinds of systems that you could potentially hook into with a webhook, that first slide that we covered that had some examples of those webhook shims do a great job of talking about various systems and what the payload might look like to be able to communicate with those. But for today, we're going to focus on PowerShell just as kind of a rudimentary example of what this payload is going to look like. Then we're going to configure Log Insight and VROPS to use those kind of payloads. And then for the system B, where we're actually posting things to, we're going to focus on Teams and OS Ticket, which is just a ticketing system, right? Like you could substitute whatever ticketing system you're using there. This just happens to be something kind of easily available. Reason we're not going to focus on Slack is because the Slack functionality is actually built into both VROPS and Log Insight. So you don't have to do anything custom to make Slack work, but Teams, you have to do a little bit of extra work. So we're going to use that kind of more difficult example just to show that it's not really that difficult under the covers. So we'll connect all of those dots and make those systems talk to one another. So the first part we mentioned that we'd use PowerShell as an example, mainly because I'm comfortable with it and it does the job pretty well, and it's fairly easy to read here. So this is just a few lines of code. We could technically do this on a single line, but just for legibility, we're using splatting here, which is you can Google PowerShell splatting and get some examples of how you can kind of create this contraption here at the top that defines all of the parameters that we're going to pass into this invoke web request commandlet, and let us put them one per line so that it's a little bit easier to read. So kind of a simple three parts, three things that we're going to pass into invoke web request. That's the URI, that's the where the webhook is. It's a very long string that we'll get from, in this case, Teams. Then we're going to do an HTTP post, and then the JSON body is everything inside of these single quotes, right? So it's this opening squiggly brace. We're just going to send one text element, and we're just going to say that we posted a message from PowerShell. So that's it with slides. We'll break out and we'll get into some demo here. That's I think why you guys are here. And I think Guy mentioned if there are any questions, feel free to interrupt, put them in the Q&A. I'll keep an eye out. If I see something come in, I'll try and handle it. But you guys should be able to unmute yourself and just ask them live if you would like. So before we get started, right, we talked about what we need to send to PowerShell, but the first piece of that is that URI. And we need to get that from Microsoft Teams, right? Because that's the system that we are going to be hooking into to send our message. So I've got a sample Microsoft team here that's just webhook testing. And we'll create a new channel called TamLab 107. You could use an existing channel if you wanted, just to kind of keep things clean and prove that we're posting in the right spot and we're not bothering anybody else in an existing channel. We'll just make a new one. Once we have our new channel created, we can come in here and add a connector to this channel. It's going to show us a list of all of the things that are available in Teams. I've already added an incoming webhook into this team, so I see just a configure button instead of an add button. You may see incoming webhook listed down here where you have to hit add. Once you hit add, it shows up under configure. That's just one extra step, but not nothing too complicated, right? So we'll hit configure. And what's going to pop up is it's going to ask us for a handful of things, right? The name of the webhook. So we'll call this TamLab 107 as well. And then it has a default image here that's kind of a standard image for webhooks. We're going to replace this. I'm going to go pick the TamLab webhooks. I'm going to use the TamLab logo, right? So any post that happens by our webhook is going to have this TamLab logo in it. So we'll click create, and it gives us a very long URL like we mentioned. So I'm going to copy that, and then we'll just say that we're done here. It's the only thing we need from our webhook. I'm going to go paste this in a notepad I have just kind of off screen, so I have it handy for when we start using it. We'll go ahead and close that. It gives us a note here that, and you can see it's from our TamLab logo. It's all lowercase TamLab 107 posted into our channel. That's kind of mixed case here of TamLab. PowerShell window down here, just kind of a blank screen. I'm going to copy and paste what we were looking at earlier into here, right? So here is our our splatting list of parameters. The URI I mentioned, it's very long. The method is post. The body is just that text message. And when we do our invoke web request, we see almost instantly that we get a status code of 200 back, which means everything was good. So I'm going to minimize this screen. And what we'll notice is that we have a new message right here inside of Teams that says error message, text posted via PowerShell. So that's the first part of the demo. I'll pause for a second. Any questions before we jump into how to do something similar from Login or vRealize?
There's nothing in the chat at the moment, Brian.
Cool, thanks, Guy.
I've unmuted everyone as well. If they want to speak, they can.
Perfect. All right, so that was just kind of an intro example, just to show that there are those three parts of things that we need for our webhook: the place that we are sending the hook, the method, in this case is post, and then the body, which, like that definition from Wikipedia, is typically JSON. So we got a PowerShell all set there. So let me go ahead and we'll do login site first. Go ahead and get into login site. And again, requires login site 8.4 or above. And this is 8.4.0. I believe as of the time of this recording, 8.4.1 is the latest version. We'll go ahead and here under administration, and down toward the bottom of the left navigation, we've got a couple of things here that can be used for outbound notifications. SMTP being sending an email message, and then webhook being the new 8.4 feature that we were talking about. So we're going to create a new webhook, and we'll call this TamLab 107 webhook, because we're super creative. And again, I mentioned Slack is supported right out of the box. PagerDuty, if we have Slack selected, we can see that the webhook payload is going to have a message that looks like this. You got a little more formatting than the text message that we sent from PowerShell, but this is some of the fields that Slack would expect or allow us to feed in. PagerDuty is expecting, a slightly different format of fields and whatnot. But we're going to do custom because Microsoft Teams wasn't in that list, and Teams is what we want to test with. So I'm going to copy and paste a different JSON format in here, right? This looks exactly like what we had over in PowerShell for the message that we were posting. The only difference is that we have some of these variable names that come from the parameters over here in the right navigation. And just a little bit of minimal formatting, like this click here and then URL in parentheses. What this is going to do is replace this URL with a link that would take you to this event and login site. But instead of having just the actual text of the link, it'll be just the word click here, right? And so we can click that instead of clicking HTTP login site server name / whatever. And then the other piece that I kind of skipped over here is the webhook URL. So I'm going to go copy that again. This is that same text that we got from Microsoft Teams earlier. And one of the things that's nice about login site is we've got just a little test alert button right there. So test webhook sent successfully. We'll toggle back over to this tab here, and we can see, login site alert. This was text that we put into our JSON message. Test webhook alert. Click here for details. Click here doesn't work because in this example, where we do a test alert, the value of the link is just null because there is no link for that test message. But we can we can actually use this to trigger and when an alert happens. We'll go ahead and configure that as well. So this was all of kind of our setup stuff. Like I mentioned, JSON is typical. It's not required. So in here we can pick the type of content. We'll leave it on JSON. Again, there's a couple actions. Post is the one that we're using, also the most common. So we'll go ahead and just save that in here. We'll talk real quick about just doing alerts in general from Login site. So if we're in interactive analytics, or actually we'll start here at the beginning, right? So let's say we're at a dashboard. In this case, I'm looking at vSphere dashboard for HA events. And let's say I wanted to get a notification in Teams anytime, or a help desk ticket, right? It's some sort of external system that supports webhooks. I want a notification in there when maybe a VM is restarted by HA. You can see we don't have any in the last 5 minutes of data here in this environment. But we can come over here and click this link to view this query in interactive analytics, so we can see exactly what it's doing. If I look back here in the last 7 days or so, we can see that I've had a couple HA events that have caused some VMs to be restarted. But let's say I want, this is my alert criteria, and I could define this any which way, right? Like I could add some stuff in here that says I only want, VMs that start with, or that contain the word prod in them, right? Because I only care about my production VMs or something like that. I can get this query just dialed in the way I want it. And then once I know what I want, this is what I want to alert on, I can just come over here to create or manage an alert, and we'll say that we want to create an alert from this query. We'll call it TamLab 107 VM HA events, something like that. We can give it a description or a recommendation if we need to. I'll uncheck email, and I'll tell it we want to do a webhook to that TamLab 107 webhook that we defined earlier. And then we can also define like how quickly we want this to happen. We could say in the last 5 minutes, if there's been more than 0, right? There's been any in the last 5 minutes, we want a notification. So it says this query will run every minute and will only alert once for the threshold defined above. So that works perfect for us, right? This will check every 5 minutes for that query that we defined, and then send us a webhook if it happens. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save here real quick, and then I'm going to open a tab here right off screen, and I'm going to try and trick a host into causing an HA event for me real quick, so that we can actually see if our alert worked. Yeah. I see there is one question in Q&A. So as soon as I get this HA event started here by causing a host to fail, give that a minute. HA, will take a minute to detect that there's a failure in my cluster, and then once it detects that, it'll take up to a minute or so for Login site to catch it. So we've got a minute here, and there's a question. So the question is PagerDuty still supported out of the box like Slack, or does it require additional configuration? So we'll jump over here real quick and go look at webhooks. And so PagerDuty is in here by default. So this is the payload that would be sent to PagerDuty from Login site. All we would have to do is come in here and create a webhook configuration, give it our URL and an integration key that we would get from PagerDuty, And then we would do that process we just went through where we have the criteria we want, and we say when we meet this criteria, call this webhook. So we don't have to come up with our own message payload. It's in here out of the box. Now, there is a bit of a disconnect between login site and VRops. Slack is supported by both of those products out of the box. I don't believe PagerDuty is supported out of the box in vRops. I think each one has two that's supported out of the box. Slack is consistent across both of them. And then in login site, we have PagerDuty. In vRops, I think it's ServiceNow, but we'll get to that in a second. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong about what the second one is. All right, and then another question just came in about how does authentication work, right? That's a great point that I didn't dig in too deep. We answered that first question. Let me go get this URL and I'll open a new screen here. So with different webhooks, authentication is handled differently. With Teams, when you go create that incoming webhook, you get this really long URL, and this is all of the stuff you need to be authenticated. So this is an incoming webhook that you'll see in Teams. You could go revoke this, but this is we'll say quote unquote our credential. Other systems like the OS ticket help desk ticketing system that we're going to look at here in a little bit uses a different method to do authentication, and so we'll show how we can actually make that work in login site as well. So we talked about PagerDuty here. Let me say we answered this question too. All right, so those are the questions. So let's go look over at Teams here and see. Okay, so we still have our test event. We haven't actually seen our HA event happen yet. So what we're going to go do, earlier we were in interactive analytics. We created our alert. That alert actually lives right over here. So we're in that administration interface. We see all of the alerts. There's a handful that are out of the box that are just not enabled. You have to go in and enable them. The one that we created was called TamLab 107. And we can see how frequently it runs, when it's going to run again. It says the last hit was 7.6 seconds ago. So in the time I was talking, I think it must have actually triggered. And so what we see, login site alert, TamLab 107, VMHA events. This is what we named that event. And so it did happen. If we click here for details, not working right now. What it should do is take us over to the login site. Not sure why it's not doing that. Well, we'll troubleshoot that in a bit. Maybe the next time we create for OS ticket, if we do the same thing with that platform, instead of trying to friendly format our URL, maybe we'll just send the raw text of it to make sure it's working as we would expect. This could just be I'm running Teams inside of a web browser. I thought I had tested this before the demo, and it worked at one point. All right, so we've done. We've created that HA event. We see our thing showed up in Teams, within a minute or so of that happening. So now let's go do. See, we're half an hour in. Okay, perfect. Timing's working great. So let's jump over to VRops. We'll do the same thing. We'll create an alert that posts to Teams, and then we'll come back and we'll touch on OS ticket and the authentication that it uses here in just a minute. So we'll log into VRops. get started, we'll go under administration, then under management, there's an outbound settings area. We're going to create this outbound connector, like a webhook plug, or webhook notification plugin is the one we're going to use. There's a Slack plugin and a ServiceNow notification plugin that are supported in here right out of the box with no extra configuration required. But we're going to go through the webhook way, just to see that in action. We'll call this TamLab 107. We need that long URL again, so we'll just paste that in here. And then no username or password are required. We just have our long URL in here to do our authentication. Now, when we hit test, this may fail to post to the server. Every time I've tried to test with this, it's failed. And what I suspect is happening is we haven't really defined the payload to post yet. Like we haven't defined like what properties and stuff that we want to send to teams. When I've tested this with other things, Slack or OS Ticket, they fail as well. And I have to believe it's because we haven't defined the message that we are sending yet. So we're sending an incorrectly formatted message. So we'll go ahead and say save. It may give us a warning that it failed to test. Do you want to save anyway? We'll say yes, because we know what's happening there. All right, and I see comment in chat here, Teams rejects empty posts. That's why it fails. And then the logs, it'll show a 400 error on the test. So back to like our PowerShell example, right? The status code of 200, that means all things are good. Status code of 400 means something went wrong. So that's the error message that we're talking about there. Right, so we have our outbound settings all defined for posting to teams. So now we'll jump over into alerts here. And we'll go to payload templates to get started. Now, if you're not familiar with like creating custom alerts and whatnot out of VRops, we covered that back in TamLab 103 that is out on the YouTube channel. So if you want to figure out how to do some of these recommendations, definitions, and alert definitions, we covered all of that in TamLab 103. In that session, we didn't talk about notifications or payload templates, just due to timing. But we're going to circle back now, and we're going to take what we created in that previous session, and we're just going to add some notifications for it. So what we see here is payload template, right? This is where we're going to tell it what we want to post. And tell it we want to use the webhook notification plugin. We'll say this is TamLab 107 payload. Skip this page here. We'll end up right here. Now, this endpoint URL, if we use the tooltip here, it says that this is the URL which is prefixed with the base URL provided in the outbound instance. So back when we were on the administration tab under management outbound settings, and we created that connector, we put in the whole URL that we have for, here, I'll just paste it in here. It should still be my clipboard, for our Teams webhook. Now, some webhooks actually let you have, like maybe this first part of it means that the team that you're posting to, and this part means the channel that you're posting to, or some combination of that, where you might have a base URL. That's what we defined earlier, and then you might have like a specific slash something that indicates where we're going to go. We don't actually need that because we defined this whole string back in that outbound connector. So in our case, we're just going to leave this top box blank. in some cases, you may have like the first half of the URL in that outbound settings that we already looked at, and then the second half of it would go here. That's not what we're doing. We'll just leave this part blank. Again, we have to tell it the kind of content type that we're going to be providing. Just like with the login site example, JSON and XML were the options, JSON being the most common according to Wikipedia. So we'll stick with that. And again, we're going to do an HTTP post. I'm going to copy this here, paste it into the payload box. And again, I'm using slightly different, this is alert definition, whereas before it was alert name. And then the link, instead of being URL, is link to alert. I got those parameters from over here in the right navigation. So we can, just, if we wanted the alert criticality, we could just copy that. We could come over here, put a space in, and then just paste in that variable. So this would say VROPS alert, whatever the definition is that we've named, and then whether it's critical or moderate or something like that. I suspected this formatting might be a little off or something, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove that, and we'll just say go straight to the link so we can see the link text. It won't be a hyperlink, but I'm doing this more for troubleshooting. So some of this again is a little bit of an art form. How do you want your message formatted? What pieces of information are important that you need to see in Teams? What is the more detailed, up-to-date stuff that you want people to go to that actual system of record to get, and you would use that link for. So again, a little bit of tweaking on what you actually want the message to look like. Again, short of knowing what you're doing, I just use the trial and error method, which worked for me. So we'll go ahead and say we'll create this payload template because we filled in all of the boxes. And so now we have our TamLab 107 payload. So we'll come over here to notifications. We'll say TamLab 107 notification, because we're creative. Here's where we could kind of define which alerts that we want to have this event trigger on, right? VROPS can throw a lot of alerts. We may not want all of them to post into Teams. That might be overwhelming. We can come over here and filter for TamLab 103. So I mentioned we went through part of this before. TamLab 103 covered actually creating alert definitions and whatnot. And in that scenario, we were using vSphere tags and creating some notifications and dashboards and whatnot to show us when a virtual machine didn't have a tag associated with it to trigger a backup schedule. So we'll say if there's a VM that's not being backed up, we want to know about that. So we'll go ahead and say that that's the only alert criteria that would cause this notification to trigger. Outbound method, we're going to stick with our webhook notification plugin. We'll use TamLab 107 because that's the one we created earlier. And then the payload that we'll post is our TamLab 107 payload that we just created. We'll go ahead and create that. Let me log into vCenter here real quick. I'm going to just go find a virtual machine that has a vSphere tag on it and for backups, and I'm going to remove it. And then VROPS is collecting stuff every 5 minutes or so. So we want to make sure that we give a little bit of time here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that tag. And now I see there's a question here in Q&A. Can we use PHP input handling on Webhook? So I think the answer is no. I guess a follow-up question would be, what on what side, so to speak, right? So in VRops, like where we define our payload template or whatnot, I don't believe there's any sort of like programming language there. But if you had like some sort of web server that had like the OS ticket thing that we're talking about next, which is a ticketing system, it's based on PHP. So like we're going to post to its PHP endpoint, and then that's what's going to actually cause the ticket to get created. But I don't think we can do it inside of VRops. And if that doesn't answer your question, I think I said everybody's unmuted, so feel free to unmute yourself and we can chat about it. But I'm going to toggle back over here to Teams because I just saw a pop up on my other monitor. I've got a VRops alert for a VM with no backup tag, and the criticality of that was immediate. And then here is my link. So it looks like I had the the variable was correct. I must have had something wrong in my click here formatting kind of thing that I was using. So I'm going to go ahead and click that link. It's going to make me log in. You may say, well, you're already logged into VRops. Why do you have to log in again? When I logged in before, I went to the host name, and I don't have, there's a place under administration where you can actually configure like what name gets put into the link. And so it actually used the IP address instead of my friendly host name, which is why it asked me to log in again. So I guess we'll go back here. I clicked this link, I logged in, and it's showing me that this one specific VM no longer has a backup tag on it. It did, I removed the tag, and so now it's tripping on vSphere tag does not contain VM backup. VM backup being that tag that we were specifically looking for back in TamLab 103 when we created our alert criteria. All right, so go back to Teams. We can see a handful of messages in here. We've got the first one where we configured our webhook. We've got our PowerShell test, a login site test. We actually have 2 of these HA events. This is something that I've seen happen with login site before. And you can see these are exactly a minute apart. So the criteria I was looking for was any VM that's been restarted by HA in the last minute. What's likely happened if we drilled into these events in a 1 minute period? Let's say there were 10 virtual machines on the host that failed. In a 1 minute period, HA may have restarted the first 6 of them or 8 of them or something, and then in the second period, just based on timing of when it actually started powering stuff back on, the other ones happened in that next minute. So I ended up with kind of a double tap on alerts here. I think the a way to handle that would be to kind of tweak my criteria on how often we're checking for events and sending them. I think when things kind of fall on one side of the 10-minute interval versus the other, I think you're going to end up with double alerts here. So just something to be aware of. I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but just something to be kind of cognizant of. All right, so I feel like I've been chatting for a bit. I'm going to pause again. We've done the PowerShell, the login site, and VRops way of configuring webhooks, all of them posting into Teams. I did allude to wanting to have a different example where we call a different system other than Teams, and in that case, it was going to be a ticketing system. So that's the next part. But any questions on what we've covered so far?
All looking good so far, Brian.
Cool. All right, well, let me go ahead and fire open a new tab here. We can see PHP here at the end of this. This is a OS ticket again, just a free ticketing system that's out there. I'm going to log in as me. I think I need to do it like this. Yeah, perfect. Okay. We'll go into the admin panel. We'll manage its API. So this does authentication a little bit different. Like we talked about before, Teams has that super long URL, and in that URL is encoded all of the information we need to post to that Teams channel. So again, we want to kind of not share that URL with everybody, because anybody who has it can then post into your team without needing any sort of username or password, because that link itself is your kind of secure string. OS Ticket works a little bit different in that you need an API key that you need to specify as part of your HTTP header when you reach into its API. And those API keys are actually bound to the IP address that is sending the request. So this IP here is the laptop that I am currently on, and this is my API key for my laptop. So I'm going to go back to PowerShell here. We'll say clear the screen, and I'm just going to paste in a slightly more complicated payload than before. All right, so we've got our request. You can see that we have our URI, that is the ticketing API. We're still posting to it. We have a new value for a header where we're passing in an API key. And then we have a body that's more than just the text body that we provided to Teams. Let me pull open one other tab here, right? Because again, this isn't just something you arbitrarily throw in there. That's what OS Ticket is expecting. And so they've got pretty solid API documentation here that shows what fields are required. I only provided the required fields, nothing else. There's other things that we could pass in. It gives examples for XML and JSON. We're using JSON, again, just because Wikipedia says it's more common. Both are supported by this system, so we can use either one we want. Just to keep things consistent, we're using JSON. So you can tell that I could have put more things in that web request, but I stuck to just the bare minimum. And again, we get like a 200 series status code back. Anything that starts with 2 is a good thing. Anything that starts with 4 is an error message. So we'll come back over here, go to our agent panel, and we can see that 8:26, which is today's date, at about now Eastern time, we have a new alert. We can click on it. It says this is my alert message. Alert is bold. We did that right here because we formatted the message as HTML based off of the OS Ticket API documentation, and then we used the HTML tag to make it bold. So now we know what we need to send to its API, right? We know the payload, we know how to send it. The only thing that's different is that we have to pass in this header. This is our authentication. So let's see here, we got about 10 minutes left. Any preference from folks on whether we go through a login site or VRops example of how to create a ticket? We'll have to walk through the kind of the whole thing again on creating the payload definition and that outbound connector and all of that jazz. If nobody has a preference, I'm going to do VRops just because it's a few more clicks and it's a few more places where we have to do things. And so we'll run through that example again, unless someone's dying to see login site. All right, so let me example.com 71. All right, so I need the IP address of my VRops server. And this is because of the way OS Ticket handles this authentication. We need an API key per per IP address. So I'm going to say my IP is .71 because that is my IP. We can create tickets. We can say VRops webhook key. And so now we have a new key in here. We'll copy that because we'll need that in just a second. Alrighty. So now let's go back to notification settings, administration, management, outbound settings. And we will create a new instance of webhook notification, and we'll call it TAM Lab 107 create ticket. The URL is the URL of my OS ticket API. Again, I don't need a username and password here. Test is likely going to fail because I'm not sending what that API is expecting, but we'll save it anyway. Just update that it's going to work when we get over here to alerts. So we'll come back into our notifications, or actually we got to start with payload templates, right? Because we need to define the fields that we want to send. We'll say that this is called TamLab 107 create ticket payload, and it's going to be a webhook notification. We don't need to add anything to our endpoint URL. We're going to send it JSON, and here is where that custom header comes into play. And this exists in login site as well. Just a place to put in our header, so we know that the header that we want is an API key, and that the value is this string that we got from our help desk ticketing system, and we're going to do a post. All right, so then I'm going to copy and paste this body that we used before for testing. I'm going to leave part of this stuff the same, right? The email and name, we'll leave those alone, and then we'll say, I don't know, subject. I know this is the subject property, but we'll just want to see it in the ticket that it says the word subject, right? So we could, or maybe instead of subject, how about we call it like VRops, so we know where it came from. And then we'll come over here and we'll say that we want the alert definition. And so we'll paste that in the subject as well. And then that it's HTML. Say, we'll start out with bold text alert. Alert definition has occurred. Please go to, let's see here, where's our link to alert? Please visit more info, something like that. Fix our typo. All right, so we've got no additional endpoint URL. We posted everything in that outbound notification. We're going to send some JSON. We're going to include our X API key, and we're going to do a post method. So we'll say create. Do a new notification. We'll do pretty much the exact same thing. TAM Lab 107 create ticket notify. Next. And we'll do the alert definition that we created back in TAM Lab 103, just because it's recorded. If you want to see how to make your own custom one, we'll use that as our example. You could use any of the out-of-the-box ones or nothing at all, and send even more events. Webhook. We'll do our create ticket webhook. We'll pick our create ticket payload. And then we've got our notification all set up. Go find a different VM here, and I guess might as well show this anyway. All right, so this is our vSphere inventory. This is just a virtual machine that has a VM backup tag. We're just going to remove that VM backup tag. This is going to cause VRops to say, oh no, this VM is not being backed up, or may have a default backup policy because there's no tag to control when backups happen. And so it'll eventually trigger that, that alert that we created back in a previous session. So now it's just a little bit of a waiting game. We'll come over here and actually, no, we'll come over here, I guess. Go back to our agent portal. We're going to wait and hopefully here within 4 or 5 minutes or so, we'll see something come in with a subject of VROPS and something to the effect that our VMs don't have, or one of our VMs doesn't have a backup tag.
There's a question in the Q&A if you're interested, Brian.
Yeah, I was just reading that. So is there a blog post you can recommend that walks through the Slack setup with VROPS? I'm sure there is one. The workflow that we just went through with Teams would relate kind of one-to-one to Slack, only instead of picking the webhook notification, there's just a Slack notification. So it should be one step less, actually. Let me go see here. Alerts. It was VM03. $11.56. That should have just triggered it. Oh wait, I'm getting confused here with all these tabs. I was expecting that I would have had our ticket in here. This is my alert subject. This is the one we did with PowerShell. I should have put PowerShell in here, so I would have known where that came from. We should see that. I think here, I would have expected when this triggered, or when this was detected here at 11:56, so just a couple minutes ago, it should have triggered 2 notifications, right? It should have triggered the one notification to Teams, because we never turned that off. It's still enabled. And it should have created a ticket. Let's see here, let's make sure I didn't miss any pieces here. We defined what we're going to filter on. That's that backup. Create a ticket. We're going to use the create ticket payload, so that all seems right. And then Teams. Same one. Cancel. I think this is the one. I don't know what happened there, but it looks like neither of my alerts triggered. I may need to give it just a couple of minutes, or kind of step through that and troubleshoot it again. I know we're at the top of the hour, so apologies for this last piece not working as expected. I think I may need to mess with that a little bit more. There was mentioned before that there's a log file on the VROP side that you can kind of look through, that'll tell you if it was a 400 error or like a 300 redirect error, which would also cause a problem. I should have included that in my notes of where that log file is. If you're a TAM, you should be able to find it in the VROP Slack channel. Someone was describing how to troubleshoot this fairly recently. But I may need to kind of step through that and figure out why this alert didn't trigger. I've done quite a bit of testing and I deleted most of it, and it's been super reliable. So I either missed something while going through it this time, or I've got some other problem that I need to sort out. But that's the demo. Minus a little troubleshooting here that I think still needs to happen. But any questions out there?
Nothing open in the chat at the moment. I mean, I think that was really, really useful. I think I've seen some similar functionality in working with things like CodeStream as well, updating Slack when builds are finished. And I think there's going to be a lot of people watching this and writing PowerShell scripts also using webhooks and dumping things into Teams and Slack and lots of other uses as well. I think it's a really, really useful piece of functionality built in as well there. So if anyone's got any last minute questions, now is a good time to air them. Just unmute yourself and say. If not, we'll call it a day there. Okay, I think we're done. Brian, that was absolutely superb. Thank you very much indeed for coming and showing us that. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Take care, everyone. Have a good one. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye.